Welcome to Motherhood. I'm Dr. Christina Hibbert, and I'm here to help you overcome, become, and flourish through this sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes up and down in the same day or week experience we call motherhood. Now, today's topic is an important one, and it's one for which I hope you will stick around, whether you've personally been through this or not, because chances are, if you haven't already, you will go through this. And what we're talking about is depression, specifically depression and motherhood, and what is it and what can we do about it? The facts are that many women go through depression, and we're going to talk about the statistics in just a minute. And I also have a really fun guest with me today. I'm excited to introduce her to you. She's a friend of mine. We've been there through each other's ups and downs, and her name's Jen Peterson, and I'll get to introduce you to her in just a few minutes as well. But first, I want to thank you for tuning in. It's such a great opportunity to get to come together as moms and learn together and, like I said, overcome the things we've been through and find new ways to do things that are better to, as I like to say, not just go through motherhood, but to actually choose to grow through it and do it together. So I hope you will join me online on my website at drchristinahibbert.com. For more information on this topic of depression and motherhood, and there's all kinds of mental health resources, as well as just a lot of other things like videos, blog posts, articles, and freebies as well. So be sure to visit that. And also, I hope you will join us on social media. I'm on Facebook and Pinterest and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and pretty much everything. So go search for me, Dr. Christina Hibbert, on those platforms. And if you're on Facebook, I hope you will also join our new Facebook group, which is Motherhood, Overcoming, Becoming, Flourishing. And all you have to do is search for that online. And if you find it, just ask to be added. And I will happily add you to our community that we're starting up, because it's a great place for us to get to know one another and to get to support one another in a better way versus you just listening to me. Now I can get to listen to you a little bit and we can kind of communicate better that way. So I hope you'll join us there. Now, as I said, depression and motherhood is a common topic, and I'm sure if you're a mom out there, you've already come across this, whether it's been in your own life or with somebody that you know. The fact is that depression is very common, and it affects about 1 in 5 women throughout their lifetime. That's a pretty high number. And not only that, but that equates to about 12 million women a year. And when we talk about globally, depression in men and women, it's actually the 3rd leading cause of disease burden in the world. And for developed countries, higher income and middle income countries like the United States, it's the 1st leading cause of disease in the world. So it's pretty common. In fact, one of the most startling facts is a study that was done several years ago that predicted that depression would become the leading cause of death, second only to heart disease, by the year 2020. And we are certainly closing in on that year. And I'm sure all of you know that depression really has become very prevalent out there. And for women especially, women tend to experience depression twice as often as men. And there are several reasons for that. We'll get into some of those a little bit later on the show. But I wanted to share that the reason why I know so much about depression really is because of my own experiences. For one, I kind of started researching and getting into this when I had postpartum depression with my first son, and then with my subsequent children. I had it with all of them pretty much. And then I've also had experiences of major depression and other types of situational depression in my life and been through various forms of treatment for it. And I wanted to just share the most recent experience I had because I want you to know, again, that I'm here not only as a psychologist, as the host of this program, trying to teach you and educate you and help you learn some things that might be helpful to you, but I'm also a mother and a fellow traveler, I guess, with you through this experience. And I do understand this topic very, very well. So as many of you know, last year, I had a very close friend take her life in May of 2014. And as I had gone through the summer and I had been through grief, which grief has elements of depression in it, but it's not clinical depression. It's a different kind of disorder. It's not a disorder, actually. It's a different kind of thing that you would deal with. And I thought that I'd finally gotten through the grief and I was feeling better and I was happy and I was able to travel quite a bit, for some for fun and some for getting to go and speak to groups, which I love to do, about my books or different things. And I really was having a great time. And then all of a sudden I found myself it felt like out of the blue, unable to sleep, feeling on edge all the time, completely anxious. My thoughts couldn't stop. I couldn't settle down. And I wondered what was going on. I had some physical symptoms, like my stomach was just sick all the time. No matter what I ate, it just felt like I didn't feel right. And so, originally I thought, okay, maybe this is digestive symptoms, or this is something I need to go to the doctor for. And maybe it's hormones because I'm sensitive to hormones. And I thought maybe there's something going on with my hormones. And I went and did all these tests and everything came back healthy and normal, which, you'd think that's a great thing. But at the time I was sort of like, oh, darn it. I wish that maybe they would have found something because that would explain this. Instead, that meant that I was in a depression again, a major depressive episode again. And this time, because I'd been through this several times before, and before I had always fought it, and I did fight it this time for a month. I fought it saying, maybe I'm just tired, and if I get a sleeping pill, maybe I can sleep better, or maybe it's the physical symptoms, or it's something else going on. But once I had ruled everything else out and realized it was major depression, I didn't hesitate to go and get help this time, because I've learned the hard way that it can be such a burden to put off getting help. It can make things worse. And I couldn't afford to do that. Frankly, it was right before the holidays. I had a book that was coming up that was going to be due. My kids needed me, and I just wasn't able to cope. So I immediately went back this time I decided to go back on medication, an antidepressant that I'd been on before, and start that up right away so that I could start just dealing with my life again. And that's what these kinds of treatments are there for. They're to help us deal temporarily until we can learn and do better and feel better. And then, we might not need them anymore. But, I share that because I know there are many out there listening right now who've been through something similar, or who maybe are going through something similar right now and aren't sure where to turn for help, and aren't sure if they even need help, or if they want to get help, or what they can do. And so I just want you to know you're not alone. And that's why I am really happy to get to introduce my friend here and guest, Jennifer Peterson. Jen, welcome to the Motherhood Show.
Thanks, Christy. I'm glad to be here.
It's so good to have you here. And especially the one reason why I wanted to have Jen, and I'm calling you Jen. I know your real name's Jennifer, but I call her Jen. So there you go. And she'll call me Christy as usual. And one reason why I wanted to have you here is just because of all the things that you've been through personally. And I know you're going to share some of that. But also, Jen she's a good example of someone who's struggled in motherhood with these kinds of things like depression, but she is willing to get herself help and learn about it and help educate other people about it. And that's where I think that she's going to be such a valuable addition to the show today. So let me just introduce her real quickly here. First of all, Jen is a mom, and she has 5 beautiful kids. They are beautiful and really, really great kids, because obviously I know them well. And Jen and I have been through a lot together. She's helped me through a lot of my down times, and I think I've helped her through a lot of hers. So we know each other pretty darn well. We've been through our down times and our up times together. Jen she's a fellow writer. She enjoys writing on topics of mental health and marriage and family. She actually taught a parenting class not too long ago here in our community. And she also helps her husband, who happens to be a dentist, like my husband. So that's another way we're similar, in his dental practice. She's a partner there with him. And she actually has a degree in screenwriting. Screenwriting, is that how you say it? Film and screenwriting, and playwriting. So that's an interesting background. That's where she got into the writing bit of things. But she's actually hoping to pursue a master's degree soon in marriage and family therapy, and I'm excited for her to do that because you already know a lot, and you'll be good at that. So, and then also she is a blogger, and you can find her blog at thejoyfinders.blogspot.com. And I hope that you'll check that out. So again, welcome, Jen. Thank you so much for being here. And let's just jump in. First of all, I wanted to talk about what maternal depression is. And I'm sure you can relate, like both of us can probably relate to this, and you listeners out there can too. Just sometimes we aren't sure, am I experiencing depression, or am I just like off? Or, I mean, what has been your experience with depression and understanding what it is and how it looks in your life?
I have found that when I'm experiencing depression, I tend to cry more easily. I'm more weepy. Even commercials can do that, and I'm really more sensitive. And I also find that I stop sleeping as well. And I tend to wake up at night and not be able to go back to sleep. And that's actually one of my the first things I notice is that my sleep disturbances. I also wake up with low mood. I tend to wake up, I feel low, and I'm not interested in being around people. I don't want to do things. I want to isolate. I say no to friends. I say no to activities. So those are some of the ones that seem to stick out the most.
That's kind of how you know that maybe something's going on versus just having a bad day or something. I mean, how would that compare to maybe just having a bad day or a bad week or something for you?
I think for me, when the symptoms stick around, like having a bad day, you know it's going to pass and you feel cruddy at the moment, but there's hope that everything's going to be okay. I think with depression, you don't feel like everything's going to be okay. I didn't. I felt like hopeless, and I felt like there's no good in my life. There's no good in me. Why would I keep doing this? Why should I keep going on?
That is such an important point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's a great way to distinguish between maybe more of a situational rough time in your life and something like depression, is this idea of hopelessness. And hopelessness is a common symptom of depression. I'm going to kind of share a few of the other symptoms of depression. You mentioned some of them when you were talking about them. Just for those of you out there who are wondering, exactly what does depression entail? I think people often say, oh, I'm depressed, but maybe they aren't really depressed. They're just sad or having a rough time or whatever. But clinical depression, it includes, feeling sad, yes, and crying and being tearful. Like Jen was saying, I feel the same way. I feel like everything can kind of set me off when I'm like that. And it also can include the significant loss of interest or pleasure in the things you used to like to do. So you might wander around kind of going, oh, what can I do to feel better? And nothing sounds good. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
You've experienced that. Yeah, I have too. And changes in sleep and appetite, as we mentioned. Now, you and I tend to be the kind that our minds start going crazy. We have a lot of anxiety with our depression.
Definitely.
But other people might be sleeping way too much and they can't get out of bed, and they're sleeping for 12 hours and they still feel tired. Right? So it could be either way.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I've had that too.
Oh,
That also is something I've noticed is that I have a hard time getting up, and I'll even miss important things because I just can't get myself out of bed, no matter how important that thing was. And then there's a lot of shame around that, because you're feel like you should be able to make yourself get up, but you're not, and you're letting people down.
Yeah, that's it. See, that's another good point. Shame and guilt. I think there's a lot of guilt and shame around depression, especially in motherhood, because you really can't afford to not be there, right?
That's right. You're really letting your children down, or your spouse. So yeah, it can be debilitating to everyone, and especially to your self-esteem, I think, and your self-worth. Self-esteem.
And that's another symptom is maybe a lower self-esteem or trouble with your self-esteem, feeling badly about yourself, which could include guilt or shame or things like that, like you're saying. And also, just generally low energy. And it can also include thoughts like problems with your thinking, really negative thoughts. I mean, that's pretty common. In fact, in cognitive behavioral therapy, which we'll talk a little bit about more later, which is a thought-based method for treating just any kind of disorder, but it really works well for depression. Aaron Beck, who developed that method, his whole idea is that depression is this negative, depressive triad where you have depressive thoughts about yourself, the world around you, and the future. So, I mean, that kind of sums it up, right? That's the hopelessness you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So those are some of the symptoms that we might experience. And everybody kind of has it a little bit different and might feel a little bit different. And so, Jen, how did you know you were, like, when did you first realize you were someone who struggles with depression, and what kinds of depression have you experienced in your life? Because there are different types.
Okay, so I first realized I had depression. I'd always struggled probably since puberty, and I just didn't know that's what it was. And it wasn't until I had my third child, and a lot of things happened at once. We moved home. We were out of state. I had just had my third. My husband was out of work, though he just graduated from dental school. He couldn't find a job. My mother was dying from cancer. And I now know I had postpartum. I didn't know then. But so as this all kind of came to a head, I really did have a breakdown. And my brother was in our hometown. He had become a doctor, a naturopath doctor. And because I trusted him, I turned to him and I told him what was going on and how I was feeling. And he told me, so he did some tests on me and then diagnosed me with depression. And that really surprised me. I had no idea that this was depression. I just thought this was how everyone felt, that these low feelings were just, this was a norm. This was normal.
Well, and don't you think that's actually kind of common with mothers, that they do kind of feel like if they feel depressed, well, this must just be the way it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've probably seen a lot of other friends and people that kind of act like that or think that too.
Yeah.
Not just you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough one. So you were diagnosed with depression at that time, and we're going to talk about postpartum depression in some other episodes more specifically, but it is a really vulnerable time during childbirth because of all the changes in your body and your hormones and your life, and usually people are moving and going to school or trying to figure out their careers or having relationship issues or whatever else, all that at the same time. And so you were treated at that time, or what happened for you?
Yes. So my brother, since he's a naturopath, he started me on some natural supplements, and they mimicked antidepressants. And so I actually did find relief, and my husband noticed I was happier. I was calmer. I was crying less, and I felt more hopeful about the future.
And then how did that kind of, over the years, how has depression shown up in your life, I guess?
And yeah, so it's really tricky. It's an ongoing, I liken it a lot to like maybe diabetes or something. It's something I have to manage all the time. And so after that time period, then I got pregnant again, and I wasn't able to take the supplements pregnant, and so I stopped. Then we moved out of the city to another area that was far away, and so I wasn't seeing my brother as often. And so I kind of just had to keep reinventing the solutions. I had to keep looking for other people to turn to, other support, other doctors. And so it kind of changes. You have to be willing to adapt. There's not anything that just keeps working. And he also stopped carrying the supplements. Their office did, and that was hard for me because you kind of get reliant on that, and when it changes up, it's stressful. So I had to learn to adapt.
Right.
And keep solving this and realizing and accepting that there was no long-term solution. I was going to have to keep working on it the rest of my life.
Yeah. And that's a tough lesson, I think, for most of us to learn. Even for me, knowing it cognitively and teaching clients about it, and then to apply it to yourself, it's a whole different ballgame. That, darn it, why is this showing up again? And why, what's going on here? And why can't I just get over it? And But as you know, and I guess I want to get your thoughts on this, so many women do see depression or feelings of depression, not even just women, but people in general, as it's a weakness, right?
Yes.
Tell me your thoughts on that, because that's a biggie, I think. A lot of us fight it and we don't want to feel like we have to deal with it for life, because what you're saying is really important. It is important when you know that you're vulnerable to this to manage it then in your life.
Yes.
But a lot of people don't want to do that because they don't want to have depression because it makes them weak, right? Or they think it makes them weak.
I agree with that sentiment, and I think that I was kind of raised to be independent. My parents taught us to be self-sufficient, to pay our way through school, and so I had the attitude of I was expected to overcome all my problems on my own. It was my job, and so that's kind of how I handled it for like 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was really hard. Like, once I turned to my brother, that was kind of the beginning of my getting better. But I do think that attitude of independence, and you don't want to admit that you need help, I think that can really stop people from getting the help they need. I also was a perfectionist and felt like I should be able to do it. I should be able to control and do things and not have to ask others for help or require help. And
right.
So I think that those things can stop people from getting help.
Yeah. And they can, I think, not only prevent people from getting help, but also contribute to more depression. You're saying things like perfectionism. I mean, that can make it worse if you're trying to be a perfectionist, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit, you know, just really quickly, just to kind of sum up, you know, Jen's explaining some of the ways that she's been through depression. I've shared a little bit of mine. And, you know, you can have major depression, which is clinically diagnosable. You can also have what might be called minor depression, where you have the symptoms, but it's not, you don't have all of them, and it's not maybe impacting your life in such a way that it's really, really interfering in your daily life. So you just feel depressed for a period of time, and then it kind of goes away with some self-help things. And we're going to talk about what you can do for self-help and other treatments. And then there's something called dysthymia, which actually just changed the name to persistent depressive disorder this year, or with the new diagnostic manual, they just changed the name. And that's a more of a milder depression, and it lasts for at least 2 years, most days, for most of the day. And that's another type of depression. Of course, Jen was talking about postpartum depression. You can also get depression in pregnancy. And if we're talking about hormones, then you can have hormonally based kind of depression or anxiety or anger, like PMS, that gets to the extreme. It's called premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
I have that.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. That's a whole other show talking about hormones and what they do to us, but that's part of depression too. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then also on to menopause, perimenopausal years, all those years leading up to menopause when your period ends. No wonder women have twice as much depression as men.
They don't have a lot of hope.
Yeah, exactly. We've got a lot of issues thanks to our hormones. And that kind of leads us into our next question is, you know, what causes these episodes of depression? You've shared some of the things that causes yours, but what would you say, what have you seen that causes these things? And then I'll kind of add some of the things that I want to share too.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I feel like, depression, I believe, is genetic. I found out since that it does run in my family. And
that is true. That is a fact. Depression is a genetic disorder like most mental illnesses are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So I believe I just had a genetic predisposition, and that also my personality contributed to it. I was a perfectionist. Mm-hmm. I am a people pleaser, so I had a hard time saying no to anyone about anything. So I would run myself into the ground trying to make everyone happy, and so that was part of it, my own personality. I tend to be more emotional and moody in general, and so I think that's something, not moody, but more emotional. Mm-hmm. I think that I didn't have a safe place to talk, and
it's a biggie.
Yes, and I think just communication, being able to have someone to talk to and say, I'm feeling sad and it's not going away, or I'm feeling discouraged, or I feel unhappy with myself, I'm feeling like a failure. Just having that outlet. I think that not having that outlet at that time in my life when it started helped it keep going and not get resolved. Mm-hmm. I was eating really bad. I was a teenager when it started, and I was eating really bad. Lots of carbs, lots of, refined
empty
carbs and sugar, and not giving my body what it needed to be able to run efficiently and run effectively. I was sleeping horribly, going to bed extremely late, getting up early, and then doing that nonstop. Mm-hmm. So for me, those were all things that contributed.
And those are all very common. Like you mentioned, sleep patterns, and we live in a society that's completely sleep deprived. And as mothers, all of you listening out there, you can definitely relate to sleep deprivation, because if you have a child, you've been sleep deprived. Mm-hmm. And that can make it really does impact our mental health, as well as what we eat and what we do and all those things. And then also just life stress. And you mentioned earlier in your episode of postpartum depression that your mother was sick and was dying of cancer. I mean, that's a huge factor that I think a lot of us kind of minimize the stresses in our life and feel like, well, we should just be able to handle it. But that's a big deal.
You're right. And that's something I didn't mention, but there were some stressful things going on in our family with some older siblings that my parents were dealing with. It was high stress at that time in our home. and definitely, and no outlet just to talk. My parents were not emotionally available at that time, and definitely just it created a lot of discouragement and the feeling of hopelessness and fear.
Especially when you're so young and just trying to figure out what is going on with me, and you don't know who to talk to. And I think at any age that could make anybody scared. You know. And then we talked about hormones.
Yes.
We laugh because everybody likes to joke about hormones, but it's so true.
Yes, and it's very real.
Real.
I think that was when, for me, I was going through puberty. So definitely I just think it was like everything combined.
Yes.
So, and I didn't realize then at the time how much that affected me. But now as an adult, I've been able to be diagnosed with PMDD and realize that my cycle and my hormones are so huge in contributing to my moods and my emotional stability and how I'm feeling about myself and life.
And I can totally relate to that. That's exactly how I feel too. And I think we do tend to minimize our hormones, and it's important to remember that, I mean, I know you can relate to this, Jen, because so many times I start feeling that hopeless feeling and I think, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? I'm such a mess. Life is horrible. And it's always my husband who's like, honey, do you think you might be like premenstrual? And he says it in a very nice way, and he's always right. And I've finally decided to just set a reminder on my phone for the week before to remind me like this might be a rough week, so that I don't end up feeling that way and thinking that it's depression when it's really like that hormonally based. You do feel depressed, and it can make you feel really crazy at times.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be part of, like you're talking about, contributing to a major depression. In fact, like you were saying, in teenage years, that's when the depression rates actually flip. As children, boys are actually at a higher rate of depression. And then at puberty, it flips, and girls have a twice as high of a rate of depression from then on through menopause. And then after menopause, it's sort of equal again. So to me, that's proof how strongly our hormones play into this and can really affect our mood and can play a part in depression as well. Yeah, so that's a biggie. So sleep, hormones, life stress, and if you'll indulge me, I just want to explain this like earthquake model I know that you've heard of before. Because for you listeners out there, it's a great way to understand how all these things combine. So if you sort of remember your hormone changes, like Jen was describing, this perfect example. She's a teenager. She's going through puberty. She's got hormonal shifts. So just like in an earthquake, before an earthquake, the ground is shifting underneath. So would her hormones be shifting her brain chemistry. And every emotional experience we have, every hormonal experience we have directly impacts our brain. In fact, our hormones are precursors to the neurotransmitters of our brain that make us feel normal. And so here she is having this puberty shift. So she's got the hormonal shifts, and then life stress. Like she said, I mean, it's stressful enough being a teenager and getting through high school, college, whatever. And but then life stress in your family or whatever is another thing that literally changes your brain chemistry. We don't have the same brains now that we had when we were young because of all these things. And then you add in other things like sleep and other factors, and your brain eventually changes so much that it can cause that big earthquake, just like we have an irregular earthquake in the ground. So I find that to be one of the most helpful ways for people listening out there. If you're not sure, why did this happen? Why do I feel this way? And why? And that's kind of what helped me in that last episode of depression, because I kind of felt like, why is this happening now? I feel like I'm finally through all this bad stuff and now I should be happy. And when I remembered that model, I thought, oh, well, yeah, I've been through a lot of life stress and I've had a lot of hormonal problems. And it's just one of those times where you go through that earthquake of depression. So that's just another way to kind of think about it, right?
Yeah, I like that way.
Okay, so let's talk about how depression impacts our day-to-day life. Let's start with just kind of you and how do you feel like depression has impacted your daily life, your desires, your friendships, sort of your drive or non-drive, what you do with your life or don't do. I mean, what's that been like for you?
Until I got help, it really held me back. It limited me. I would not say yes to things when people asked me to do things, whether it was career related, socially related. I tended to back down, back off, and kind of just keep myself isolated and out of areas that might have created more stress in my life. And
Yeah. So yeah, so you kind of, do you feel like I mean, has it been kind of a day-to-day thing for you where it's affected you? Maybe not every day, but you're kind of looking for it all the time?
Yeah, and once I started getting help and realized that I would have to manage this consistently, then it's more something that can creep up on me where I'm more like, oh, here it comes. This is depression and I don't want to go there anymore. And so I start to ask myself, how am I getting here? Why am I feeling this way again? Oh, I've been up late all week. I've been making sleep not a priority. Or I've been eating really bad. Or a big one is talking about my feelings. When I keep my feelings pent up inside and I don't express them at all and I don't talk to somebody about how I'm feeling, that also can contribute because I feel like I just feel hopeless. I feel like I don't have any control over things. But when we talk to people and reach out and say, hey, I'm feeling this way, then they can normalize that and validate us. And we realize, oh, hey, I'm not alone. Or that's not as big a deal as I made it. Or they're able to offer help that we wouldn't have gotten it if we just not talked to someone.
Yeah.
So,
and this kind of speaks, what you're saying kind of speaks to what we were mentioning earlier about how I think a lot of people don't want to talk about it because they are embarrassed or, again, feel weak or guilty or whatever. How have you seen that show up, like with your friends or with other people or yourself in general?
yeah, that's a tricky one because I think there are people who it's tricky. Like maybe you have parents who are non-believers in medication. They're non-believers in getting therapy and emotional help. You might have a spouse that is non-supportive of medication and getting help. Even children can maybe kind of undermine your ability to take care of yourself. I think the most important thing I learned for myself was that I finally cared about myself enough that I just didn't care anymore what other people thought. And the stigma around it, I feel like it is getting less. It's talked about more. People are becoming more open. There's more popular culture who are admitting they have depression and coming out and talking about it. All of that helps, I think, to normalize it. Just like someone who has diabetes, who has cancer, who's struggling with something that is not something that they might not have been able to control having, but they're able to talk about it like it's just a normal thing. And I feel like that's what depression is now. It's something that I inherited, that I didn't ask for, that I struggle with, just like, a friend might struggle with a medical issue or something like that.
Right. And I love how you said that, because that is the perfect way to think of it. You wouldn't tell somebody, like my husband, as you know, has diabetes, and I wouldn't tell him like, you're so weak because you have to use insulin. It's so ridiculous, And how is it really different? It's not, people think it's different, but it's not. And I'm with you. I think it's getting better. The stigma is getting a little less, but it's still hard for a lot of people. I know a lot of our listeners out there will be listening to us and going, this is me, Jen's describing exactly what I'm going through. And yet they might feel that shame or embarrassment. So what have you done to try to help yourself get over that? Because I know you work on it.
Yeah, I think just being honest. I think that I used to hide it, and I used to hide that I had problems. And then once I was diagnosed, and I just started to tell people. I told my sister, I told my other sister, I told my parents, I started telling friends. And the more I told people what I was struggling with, the more it helped. The more people would be like, oh, I know, they call my house and on the machine be like, I know you're there, don't not pick up, I know you're there.
Right.
And before, people would just be like, she never answers the phone, she doesn't like me. People would stop trying to be my friend because they thought it was them, but it was me. And so once they knew I had depression, for them, I think it helped them to understand, oh, it wasn't about me. She wasn't trying to dismiss me or trying not to reach out to me. She was in a bad place and it had nothing to do with me. And so really it made it so that I could finally have friendships and connect with people who loved me and cared about me. Right.
That's so good. That's so important. Being honest and talking with people. And, I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking of, when was it, last summer, maybe last summer, I don't even remember, whenever we Jen and I tend to go get pedicures. We see each other every week at church and in the community and stuff, but we hardly ever get to go out. And so we always just like, we're going for a pedicure. And usually it's her saying, we're going for a pedicure. So, and I was having a really hard time and I hadn't talked to really anybody. And I know there are people I can talk to. And I just, sometimes I feel like, you know, you don't want to bother the person or you don't want to like dump on somebody or you don't want to be negative. And we started talking and I remember we were sitting in my car after with our pretty toes and it was so helpful because you were just saying like, Christy, you've got to stop helping people. You've got to say no. You've got to take a break. You've got to take care of yourself and you've got to talk to your husband and make him this and that. And it was just so helpful to hear. It's like, you know that in your own head, but when you hear a friend telling you, I'm giving you permission to say no to stuff, or I'm giving you permission to ask for help and accept it. Or, you know what, this is a bigger deal than you think. It not only helps you, but also brings you closer. I mean, I swear, I told everybody, like, you totally saved me at that time. You know, it was the most helpful conversation and it was simple. It was just going to get a pedicure and talk about things, you know, and that's how we get close.
I think so. And I think the big thing is maybe in the past, if you had brought up that, I might have said, oh, sure, and then never called you back, or purposely canceled and made up an excuse, or that day canceled and not gone. Mm-hmm. But it's the courage. You have to have courage and do the things that don't feel comfortable when you have depression. Do the opposite of what you want to do. You want to eat junk food, eat something healthy. You want to sleep in, get out of bed. Mm-hmm. You want to stay in your pajamas, shower and get ready. You want to tell your friend no, go and do that thing because you feel better. It's a guarantee you're going to feel better. Mm-hmm. It's just getting yourself to do those hard things.
Right. And this is some of the self-help ideas that we were kind of alluding to earlier. And I think that's a great suggestion. Make yourself do something. Yeah. Even if it's just one thing a day. In fact, you know, in therapy, that's one of the best tools for helping people with depression is activity scheduling, just making them have something they have to get up and go out and do. Nothing too overwhelming, even going to the grocery store or like you say, meeting with a friend, right? Something.
I agree. Just going to the grocery store. I have done that. I've made myself a schedule for the week and I say, do this every day. And I stick to it. And I wake up still and I'm like, I don't want to do it. I don't. Yeah. But I say, no, you're doing it. And then it gets my day going. And then I'm up and I'm showered because I had to do it. And then a friend calls me for lunch and I'm showered. Mm-hmm. And I can say yes. Whereas before they'd call me, I'd be like, I'm in my pajamas and they are ready to leave. And I miss that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, absolutely. That is so important. As the saying goes, motion creates emotion. And I love that because it kind of reminds me, I try to remind myself of that too, when you do have those times where you don't want to do anything. And that's the hard part about depression is it really does zap your motivation.
Yes.
It's kind of like that irony, right?
Yeah.
It makes you not want to do anything. You don't want to do anything, but yet you know that that's also the solution. Yeah. To make yourself get up and do something, not like we're talking about saying yes to everything out there. Yeah. Definitely having moderation, but motion, moving your body, it helps you to improve that emotion that you had, that depression, and make it better for the day, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So those are great strategies that can help you out there too, listening, to help you in your day-to-day life, to help you just kind of get up, get moving, talk to somebody, be honest. These are really great ideas. Now, let's talk about how depression impacts our kids. I mean, I have my own thoughts on this, but I'd love to start with you, Jen. I mean, what have you seen as far as how depression impacts your kids and your family life? Let's say non-treated depression or yeah, well, even treated, I mean, for a while.
I think, that is finally one of the biggest things that has gotten me to get help and change was seeing how it was impacting my children. Mm-hmm. When I didn't know I had it and I saw that I was moody and irritable and mean, I would become verbally abusive, super on edge, just irritable at them. And that was really affecting their self-esteem. Their mother was mad at them all the time. Their mother was in the house all the time and didn't want to leave. And they were always watching TV or just, they were being isolated. They were being kept from engaging with friends and activities. And as the years went on and I started to see the results of this with my older children, it really saddened me. And that was one of the biggest motivators to say, I'm done. I need to get help for them, not just for me, but because this isn't the kind of mom I want to be. I want my kids to be able to have a healthy home they're going to grow up in and a healthy mom and someone who can leave the house, who can make new friends, because then they're going to leave the house and they're going to make new friends. Right. It really was keeping them restricted. It really was. Right. Emotionally, physically, you know, so.
You know, this is so important because we have to be honest about this. And we're not talking about this, listeners, in a way that's trying to heap guilt on anybody. Obviously, we both are sharing that we have messed up. We've seen the impact of how our depression, when we haven't handled it, has impacted our families negatively. And it's not about guilt or putting any of that on you. It's just really about being honest about it does impact your children when you don't do something. And I see that all the time, or I hear that all the time from mothers who say, well, it's okay because it's only affecting me. You know, I'm sad, but it's okay because I'm still being the best mom I can be. But that's just not true. If you're sad, your kids pick up on that on some level. They will notice on some level. You could be doing every single thing for them, but are you as emotionally available as you could be?
You're not.
You're not. And you're not as happy as you could be. You're not able to have that joy that you would want them to see in you. And that to me as well is something that helped me to realize in the times when especially this last time, I don't want my kids to, especially having gone through just losing our friend who was their best friend's mother. I didn't want them to suffer more or to not have that joy back. And so it was like, okay, we got to get on this now because in fact, the truth is that maternal depression is the number one predictor of future behavioral and cognitive problems in children. And it impacts parenting in a way that is really significant because, as you're alluding to, depressed parents aren't able to interact in positive ways as much. They don't do as much reading with kids. They don't spend as much quality time. They don't plan as much fun activities. They don't have fun together, these kinds of things. And it can also impact, like you mentioned earlier, self-esteem is a big part of this, which I think we should talk about in a minute. And you kind of almost pass that on to them too, because you don't have it. So how can you give that to them?
I totally agree. Your children really absorb whatever it is that you're sending out. Mm-hmm. And they, whether it's good or bad, they're absorbing it.
Mm-hmm. Which is, it's tough to hear, but it's true. And that's why we say it, because we want moms out there to know, first of all, you're not the only ones who might be feeling that way. And you, yeah, of course you're going to feel guilty when you see it. But also we need to learn to get past the guilt, the embarrassment, the shame of it, and realize that it's not something to be ashamed of. In fact, it's a strength to acknowledge our weaknesses and get help.
Definitely. And yeah, I agree. Just being able to not be embarrassed, I think that's a big one. Mm-hmm. And not shaming yourself. I think for a while I was really sad. I was mad at myself. But then I realized, is this helping them? This isn't helping me to punish myself and to continue to be sad. All I can do is talk to them, tell them what happened and why, and what I was going to do different, how I was going to get help, and that I would also help them as I started to recognize symptoms in them, since there has been a family pattern from my parents and siblings. Mm-hmm. And then just do the best you can and go forward and not hold yourself to the past, and forgive yourself and know that you were only doing the best you could at the time with the knowledge that you had.
Right. Oh, this is so important. Forgive yourself for what you've already done and how you've been. And then you learn better, you do better, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the idea. And you just keep working on it, and you don't let yourself fall into that pattern of the past, like Jen is saying. This is really important. And the other thing that you mentioned that's really important is being open with your family about it. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of I've had several clients who I've been helping through depression, and they are very nervous about telling their kids that they struggle with depression. They don't want their kids to know, but I say your kids know. Whether they know or not, they know. On some level, they know. Yeah. And so it's better. It's almost like less scary for them and less confusing for them for you to just say, you know what? I struggle with depression. This is how it is. And this is exactly what I did, those months ago, was just sit all my kids down and said, I'm going through depression again, and I'm getting help, and I'm going to the doctor, and these are the things I'm doing to help myself feel better. And I don't want you guys to be nervous. And if you have questions, I want you to ask me. And I'm sorry if I'm snapping a little bit more than usual, but I just don't feel good, Yeah. And I think it helped them. They, first they're kind of quiet, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's saying this to us. But then it was sort of like, oh, okay, all right. And, kids are resilient. They can handle it. And they really love honesty above all, I think.
I agree. I think it makes them feel like they have a sense of control in their own life, and they know what's going on when there's a name for it. And the parent takes responsibility and says, this is my issue. Mm-hmm. I'm working on it. You can talk to me about it. I think they feel safer.
Yeah.
And when it's a hidden thing and they have to wonder what's really going on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, is it my, and they usually tend to blame themselves.
That's true.
That's something I've learned in therapy, is that children will blame themselves for things like that, where they think it's my fault my mom's not spending time with me. I must be a bad kid, or it's my fault they reacted that way. But we all know it's not. It's us. It's this thing inside of us that we have to work on and get help for, and it's not our children.
That is so important. I hope you listeners are hearing this, because that's very true. Kids do tend to take it on if we don't tell them otherwise. They think it's them, and we need to help them to feel safe and comfortable and not take it on as their own problem. And the other important point that you made, Jen, was that we don't want to dump it on them. So it's not, there's a difference between saying, I'm depressed, so feel sorry for me and take care of me and help me, versus saying, I have depression, and this is, like you say, taking ownership. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm working on. This is my problem. And I apologize for how it's affecting you. And I want you to, be open with me, and I'll be open with you, versus, dumping it on them.
Definitely. Because dumping it on them can make them feel like they're responsible for it. And that's a whole another level of trauma we can do to our children. It's making them think they have to solve it. Right. They're responsible to help us be happy, to help us get out the door, to help us not be depressed. I mean, they're children after all. So.
Right, exactly. And, obviously this affects our relationships and our marriage as well. I mean, that's a whole other topic. I want to just touch on it because we're getting short on time. We have so much we can talk about. And I also want to get to some of the treatment options here at the end. But just in brief, what would you like to say about, what are your thoughts on how untreated depression affects your marriage or your personal relationship?
So I would say that for my husband and I, we both came into the marriage. I came in with depression, and he came in with some other issues. And between the two of us not getting help, we almost lost our marriage. We were getting near separation and divorce. And once we both started to recognize our problems, take responsibility for them, and get the help we needed, that took so much off of, marriage is hard enough as it is.
Yeah.
Parenting is hard, marriage is hard, and having the extra things that have not been dealt with, like depression and other issues, just adds another layer that can really break a marriage down, can really destroy it. And so I think it's paramount that to keep a marriage going and to take care of each other, you have to take care of yourself.
Oh, so important. To take care of each other, you have to take care of yourself. Absolutely. So crucial. And I appreciate you being honest and sharing how it really can be in a marriage. And the truth is, when one partner is depressed, it's likely the other one becomes depressed too.
Yes.
And then it's a real problem because both of you are struggling, right?
Yes.
And it can be tough for our husbands, our partners to deal with this. I always joke, with my husband, like, hey, I'm going to hook you up with some of my friends who have depression. And like our husbands can get together and have a support group for each other. How do I deal with my wife? Yeah. But, it can be hard for them to deal with as well, but we can help them understand as well, just like we did with our kids. Definitely. Explain this is what I'm going through. And also with them, especially, this is what I need from you. Don't you think that husbands really like that kind of direction? Like, what can I do for you? How can I help? How can I fix this?
Definitely. I really like what you just said about telling them what we need from them. Yeah. I think my husband, when I didn't know what I had, I think he took it personally as well. Thought it was him. He must be a bad husband. Yeah. And then it was nice to be able to say, actually, it wasn't you. This was about something else. And then be able to tell him, these are the things I need from you. Yeah. And even now it's been really nice because we are both in a place where we can be honest, and he can say, hey, I'm struggling. This is what I need from you. I need a hug or something like that. And I can say, I need you to take me on a date. Yeah. I really need you to, I'm feeling, like just lonely and unloved, and I just really need some one-on-one time. That's so good. So being honest with your kids, with your husband, these are all ways to really get things out in the open with your friends. Mm-hmm. And I think one important point we want to both make, I know you agree with me on this, is to find people that you can trust. You don't just tell anybody, hey, by the way, I'm struggling with depression, and it's not going to help you. Mm-hmm. But you find the people, like I knew I could trust you. That's why I talked to you. I knew that you understood. I know you got it. Some people are not going to get it in the same way that others are. That's right. So find the right people to help you. And then the question becomes, okay, when do we reach out for more help? We've talked about some of the things we can do at home.
getting our partners to help us, getting the kids to be involved and understanding, sleeping, asking for help from others, talking with people, trying to schedule our days or plan things that would get us up and get going, get us showered at least. So how do you know when you need something beyond that? Because you've mentioned you've been for professional help, and then you've also done some self-help things.
So I finally agreed to go on a medication when nothing else was working.
Yeah.
Like I was using all the natural products I could. I was doing the best I could to go to bed on time. I was eating healthy. I was trying to manage my emotions. I was communicating and talking. Yeah, I could not get out of it. It was also contributed to by SAD, like the seasonal affective disorder.
Oh, yes.
I started to see a pattern that I was really bad in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd kind of come out of it in the spring, summer.
Mm-hmm.
So when I finally did get on an antidepressant, it was near the winter, and I had tried everything else, and I wanted to feel better. I wanted to be happy and be able to enjoy my life.
Yeah. And, I appreciate you being honest about that, because, we could have, and we probably will have a whole other show on antidepressants sometime, or medications, because there's that's a real one where people feel like guilty or ashamed, embarrassed.
Yes.
I know even I felt that way, and I help people go on medications because I know how much it can help. Yes. And the first time I went through it, I wrote about this, and This Is How We Grow. I just had such a hard time. I just felt like I don't want to do this. I feel like weak, and I struggled because my mother grew up with depression. And that's another reason why I know that the things we're talking about are so important, is because when you have a mother who has depression, you do see how blocked it is and what you miss out on as a child. And that's what motivates me to take care of myself. And that's what actually motivated me to go on the medication, because I thought, I don't want my children to be suffering through this. And I had been in therapy, and like you said, I've been doing all those things. Exercise, that's a huge one too. Yes, exercise.
How could I forget that one?
I know, right? I have a whole book coming out on
huge.
that pretty soon. That's a biggie. And just all of those things. But when you're doing all those things and they're not helping, then you can reach out for professional help. Also, I would add, if you're feeling really depressed and it's going on for, typically depression is diagnosed if you have pretty significant symptoms, those symptoms we talked about at the beginning, for 2 weeks or longer, or if they're getting significantly worse.
Yeah.
And sometimes depression I'm sure you've experienced this, some of your episodes might be kind of more mild and build until they get bad enough that you're like, okay, now I need to go do something more about this. Mm-hmm. And others might be like this one I just described. It was like a month, and then I was like, all right, this is not good, So some of them might happen more quickly than others. But we can reach out for professional help. And as Jen mentioned, therapy is a great place to start. Because I think I'm biased, I know, but I think you are too, because I think it helps us to learn new ways to do things.
Yeah.
Is that what you found?
Yeah. I definitely think therapy is huge.
Yeah. It's a great place to start.
It is. And I think it's one of the foundations. I think for me, that's one of the foundations for getting help is therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I will always, whether I, do it once a week when I really need it, or once a month, or every 6 months, just to be able to talk to someone and say, I'm here again, or I feel like I'm getting there, and they can say from a, outside point of view, they can see what you're going through and have really good
insight, and also teach you new ways to do things.
Yes.
And they're not involved in your life.
Yes.
You don't have to feel guilty about burdening them because you're paying them. Yes. So that's wonderful. I love that. And that's what I always say, that unless it's severe, like depression that's severe, I really do feel like you do need a medication. Severe depression where you're debilitated, you can't get out of bed, you can't function, these kinds of things. The medication, it's not a happy pill, right? It doesn't make you all perfect happy.
Pill. It is not.
No, it is not. If it were, probably more people would be on it. Yeah, exactly. But the way I say it is just, you're at your normal level when you're feeling fine. And when you're depressed, you wake up every day starting below normal level. Yes. And the antidepressant just brings you to normal. Yes. So you still have your ups and downs. It's just that your ups aren't, as your downs aren't as low as they are when you're off the medication, and your ups can feel a little bit more normal and high. So it's not a happy pill, but the medication, when it's severe depression, it's very helpful, very useful. Even electroconvulsive therapy is used sometimes with severe depression that's resisting treatment. But also, if your depression is more mild to moderate, then you might try therapy first and see how it's going and see if that can help. Kind of like Jen was saying with self-help. You try your self-help. If that's not good enough, then maybe you try your therapy. And if that's not good enough, then you start talking about, okay, what medication might be helpful and should I try this? And not everybody has to be on medication their whole lives. But it's true that the older you get, the more likely you are to have a recurrence of these episodes, because you're going to have more hormonal events. You're going to have more life stressors coming up. And the older we get, the more likely we are to stay on those medications longer, because we start to realize how much they really do help as well. And there's no shame in that. That's just, it's a tool. It's another tool in the bag of tools of self-help and therapy and all these kinds of tools that can be helpful.
Yeah.
And along with that, cognitive behavioral therapy, I know you've done some of that. How has that helped you?
That has been huge as well. I think I always have had an overactive brain, and I always like to analyze and overthink everything, and I tend to be critical of myself and others. That's the perfectionist side to it. And being able to do the CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, has really helped me to look at the way I think, and how a lot of times, or most of the time, maybe my thinking's faulty, and that a lot of the things I believe about myself and others and life in general has actually been based on things that aren't true, and they're irrational. And so to really challenge those thoughts every day, and it has really helped me to have a new perspective on myself and being a mom, and expect less, just to be satisfied with less, and to realize that I'm human, and
you're doing your best.
Yes. Exactly.
And you really are. And that's the wonderful thing about, I think, cognitive behavioral therapy, is once you learn the tools of it, you do use it all the time. I liked how you said, being a better mom, or being happier with being a mother, or letting go of expectations, or being less of a perfectionist. It kind of all goes back to how we think. And while we don't have time to get into how this all works, there's lots of resources on my website at drchristinahibbert.com on, cognitive behavioral therapy tools to change your thinking, thought management. You can look all those things up, and some videos as well. But this also kind of leads to our final point that I just wanted to touch on, which is this idea of self-esteem and how it impacts, or is impacted by, depression, and impacts depression. And how what you're describing, Jen, is how you've learned how to change your thinking about yourself and not have that negative triad of thinking yourself and the world and everybody around you is all negative and bad.
Yeah.
So how have you been able, what's helped you kind of overcome those self-esteem challenges, kind of to wrap us up here?
I think definitely it's the thoughts in our head, changing how we view ourselves. Through therapy, I was introduced to the idea of faulty core beliefs, which are beliefs that we learn when we're young about ourselves, based on how people react to us or how we react to certain situations. And we base our self-esteem on these things that, as we re-examine them as adults, we realize that they were negative or wrong assumptions. So we can go and challenge those. Also, affirmations. I used to think they were cheesy, that I just wasn't doing them right, and I didn't really understand them. And I've been using those to counteract negative thoughts about myself. And most of the affirmations are things like, I have a right to make mistakes. I'm a human. And those are the type of ones that I actually read every day. I read the same set every day to myself, and they do help. They're just things like that. Like I don't have to be perfect to be, worthwhile, or I don't have to be pleasing and taking care of others to be a worthwhile person. And the more I say those to myself every day, the more I'm able to let go when people have expectations, and say no when it's not right for me. And I know that I'm saying yes too often, and I'm going to have a meltdown.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that this is a great way for us to end, because this is something that everybody out there can do at home very easily. And, one thing that I think is implied in what you're talking about with affirmations is that you did the work to try to get to where you can believe those. A lot of times we try to affirm things to ourselves that we don't believe, that somebody else tells us, and we're like, I don't believe that at all, but I'm just going to tell myself every day. But you've gotten to a place where you can believe those things, they're true. And when you're in depression, you might not believe they're true, but at least at some point you knew they were true. And you can remind yourself, like, I know this is true. I know this is good. It's kind of like how I feel when you know you're in a bad mood, and if I just get up and go for a walk, I will feel better. You affirm that, that even though you don't feel it in the moment. So that's where those affirmations can be helpful, and it can change the way we think about ourselves and feel about ourselves. Also, as we're doing today, talking about depression, I think is a biggie to reducing the impact on our self-worth and self-esteem, and to help us realize that it's not a weakness, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to just deal with. And like you said earlier, which was a great point, when you know that you're vulnerable to this, you just work to, do your best to kind of manage it and to keep on top of it, and to learn the things that are coming up in your life that are signals saying, oh my gosh, depression's about to hit, right?
Yes.
So you can kind of prevent some of it, or prevent how bad it could get, maybe.
Yes, I think that's one of the benefits of being honest and dealing with it, is that you can have a game plan. With my fourth and fifth babies, I did keep having children, and I knew what to expect. I knew what was going to happen. So I had a game plan. When people offered to help, I would say yes. And I would ask for help with the cleaning. I would expect my husband and children to help more. I would be okay with being in my pajamas for a couple months.
Yes.
And I was
give
okay
yourself
with
a break.
being chubby. I had to accept it's okay to be chubby. I'm going to be chubby. I just had a baby, and
right.
I can't expect to lose the weight fast. And so I think that has helped. And with the seasonal affective disorder, having a game plan, knowing when it's coming up, okay, I'm going to set a goal to get out in the sun every day, even when it's cold, or to call a friend and do something weekly with a friend. But that has really made a difference. Being prepared for it, you're going to have more success.
That's so good. Well, I am so grateful for you being here. We could talk about this forever, but I love that we're ending on that idea of making a game plan. So you listeners out there, if you think you or somebody you love is struggling with depression, don't let it keep going on. Don't let it make you feel like you're weak, or like be embarrassed about something, or feel like, it's not something that you want to deal with. Listen to what we're saying today. Listen to Jen's experiences and to mine, and to those of so many others who can say honestly that when we tackle this, when we talk about it, when we normalize it, it helps us feel better, and it helps everybody else too. It really helps all of us mothers. We work together. We can make this better. So I'm really grateful for you here today helping us do that. And I hope that all of you out there will go. I'm thinking now I'm going to write a blog post with how to make a game plan, because I think that's what people would be wanting to know. How do you make a game plan? So Jen's going to give me some of her ideas, and I'll write a blog post on my website at drchristinahibbert.com on that. So you can go check that out, as well as I have a few articles on women and depression, and also one on 5 tips to turn a rainy day sunny. So you can check those out online, and join us on social media as well to follow more of this. But thanks again for being here, Jen.
Thanks for having me, Christina.
I know I'll want to have you back. It's so fun to get to hang out with friends on the radio. So fun. So until next time, I hope you all out there will choose to grow through motherhood and not just go through it, because it's so much better and more fun and more supportive to grow through it together. And that's what we're doing here each week on Motherhood Radio on webtalkradio.net. And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.